been trialed for these sting operations, how many were, you said there was like category 1, category 2?
Yeah, so there's been 500 cases total, more than that, but approximately 500. Not all of them were sting operations. Some of them were, they got somebody for immigration or lying to the FBI. So the FBI has two categories for terrorism. One is things you would suspect, like conspiracy to use weapon of mass destruction, airplane hijacking, and then the other, could be any other crime as long as the evidence shows there's a connection to terrorism. Half of those 500 cases involved informants. Of those 500, about 150 were these sting operations where the informant was used or an undercover agent was used to give capacity to someone who said they wanted to do terrorism.
Yeah. I was just wondering, in recent American history, like the Oklahoma City bombing and others, the acts of terrorism were done by non-Muslims. In the spirit of equal opportunity, does the FBI, have they made any effort to do sting operations with non-Muslims?
Yes. So the question was, obviously there's a threat of terrorism that isn't Islamic terrorism. So the Oklahoma City bombing being an example of that. The FBI has been very aggressive, in particular with environmental activists and so-called anarchists. If you look at the NATO 4 and these group of 7 guys recently in Cleveland who plotted to blow up a bridge, that was an FBI agent FBI informant in that case being involved. There are cases where they've used sting operations for, in Florida, for example, there was a case involving a guy who was a member of the Army of God, which is a right-wing group that's anti-abortion and generally is involved in the bombing of abortion clinics. Eric Rudolph was a member of that. But what we're not seeing is the same level of activity in those groups. For example, the sovereign citizen movement, which I consider a right-wing movement, but not everyone does. These are a group of men who believe that the U.S. men and women, that the U.S. government doesn't have authority over you, that you can opt out of contracts, and these are people in their paranoid belief who build up large arsenals of weapons. And there was a case of law enforcement members being killed in West Memphis, Arkansas, and this is something that the FBI, only after that murder in West Memphis, Arkansas, came out and said, yes, the sovereign citizen movement is a growing and dangerous threat. So we're not seeing the same level of activity with sting operations being used in, I would say on the right side of the political spectrum as we are with Islamic terrorism and particularly with environmental activists and the so-called anarchists. Yes?
There's a lot of documentation from informants and FBI records that the FBI provocateured the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center in New York that killed 6 people and injured about 1,000 others, caused considerable damage. Doesn't that lend credence to the theory that the 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by the US government?